Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 2,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What is going on, Vikings Nation? Buckle up, because the drama in Minnesota just went from 0 to 100 faster than Justin Jefferson running a 9 route. We've got ourselves a full-blown quarterback controversy, trade rumors swirling like a Minnesota blizzard, and some serious questions about whether the Vikings' prized first-round pick is mentally tough enough to handle the big leagues. This is the kind of juicy, behind-the-scenes NFL chaos that makes the offseason almost as entertaining as the regular season itself. So here's the bombshell that dropped and sent shockwaves through the Vikings fanbase. According to NFL insider Mike Florio, the Minnesota Vikings were genuinely concerned that their golden boy, JJ McCarthy, might have actually requested a trade last offseason if they brought in legitimate quarterback competition. Yeah, you heard that right. The kid they drafted in the first round, the guy they've been selling as the future of the franchise, the Michigan national champion with that supposed killer mentality. Apparently, his camp might have thrown a fit if Minnesota signed one of the big-name quarterbacks they were considering, whether that was Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, or even bringing back Sam Darnold with a more prominent role. Now, let's pump the brakes for just a second and really digest this information, because if this report is true, and that's a massive if, this is absolutely bonkers. Think about the audacity, the sheer stones it would take for a rookie quarterback who hasn't played a single meaningful NFL snap to demand a trade because he doesn't want competition. This would be like showing up to your first day at a new job and immediately telling your boss that if they hire anyone else with similar qualifications, you're walking. It's insane. It's entitled. And quite frankly, if this report holds water, it's one of the softest moves we've seen from a young quarterback in recent memory. But here's where it gets interesting. Part of me, and I think part of any reasonable Vikings fan, finds this really hard to believe. Mike Florio is a respected reporter with solid sources, but could he have been fed some bad information? Could this be a case of telephone tag where something got lost in translation between McCarthy's camp and whatever source leaked this to Florio? Because the optics of this are absolutely terrible for JJ McCarthy. Remember, at that point in the offseason, all McCarthy had under his belt was one mediocre preseason performance against the Las Vegas Raiders. He looked okay, nothing special, certainly nothing that would warrant the kind of confidence where you'd threaten to request a trade if the team brought in veteran help. The profile we've been sold on JJ McCarthy since he was at Michigan was that this kid is built differently. We heard it over and over again during the draft process. Scouts raved about his mental makeup, his leadership qualities, his unflappable demeanor under pressure. The narrative was that this is a guy who won a national championship, who thrives in big moments, who looks you dead in the eye with a firm handshake and exudes confidence without arrogance. He was supposed to be the anti-diva quarterback, the guy who embraces competition and uses it to fuel his development rather than running from it. But when you start connecting the dots with all the reporting that's come out about McCarthy over the past several months, a different picture starts to emerge, and it's not nearly as flattering. Throughout this past season, we kept hearing Vikings players and coaches refer to JJ as Little Bro or the Kid. Now, on the surface, that might seem like harmless locker room banter, the kind of thing you'd expect for a rookie. But when you compare it to how other teams treat their young quarterbacks, it starts to feel different. You don't hear Chicago Bears players calling Caleb Williams Little Bro. You don't hear New England Patriots teammates constantly referring to Drake May as the Kid. Those guys, despite being the same age or even younger than McCarthy, command a different level of respect in their locker rooms. Then there's the infamous Week 18 incident against the Green Bay Packers. McCarthy was dealing with a hairline fracture in his wrist, a legitimate injury that should have made him ultra-cautious about contact. The game was completely meaningless for the Vikings, a throwaway contest at the end of the season with nothing on the line. Yet there was JJ McCarthy, scrambling to his right, and instead of simply stepping out of bounds like any smart quarterback would do, he lowered his shoulder into a Packers defensive back and then proceeded to talk trash afterward. Look, I'm all for competitive fire. I love when quarterbacks have that dog in them and aren't afraid to mix it up. But there's a time and a place for everything, and that wasn't it. That play showed a fundamental lack of self-awareness and maturity. You're an injury-prone quarterback. You're already banged up. The game doesn't matter, and you're putting your body on the line for what? To prove a point to a defensive back you'll never see again in a game nobody will remember. Speaking of injuries, let's address the elephant in the room. JJ McCarthy has developed a concerning injury history in an incredibly short amount of time. The knee injury that required surgery and wiped out his entire rookie season was devastating enough, but the way everything unfolded, the timeline, the setbacks, the multiple procedures, it all painted a picture of a fragile player whose body might not be ready for the brutal punishment of professional football. And that's terrifying for a franchise that invested a first-round pick in this kid with the expectation that he'd be their quarterback of the future. The timing of McCarthy's rookie season was also particularly challenging from a personal standpoint. He was having a child, dealing with the massive life adjustment of becoming an NFL quarterback and trying to prove himself worthy of replicating what Sam Darnold accomplished. That's an enormous amount of pressure for anyone, let alone a 22-year-old kid fresh out of college. So, in some ways, it makes perfect sense that things would fall apart. The mental load was probably overwhelming, and when you combine that with the physical setbacks, you've got a recipe for disaster. But here's where Vikings fans need to take a deep breath and resist the temptation to completely write off JJ McCarthy just yet. Yes, right now, in this moment, things look absolutely terrible for him. The injury history is concerning. The reported lack of maturity is troubling. The possibility that he or his camp would threaten a trade over competition is embarrassing, if true. And let's be honest, when he has been on the field, whether in preseason or practice, the reports haven't exactly been glowing. But the NFL is a league where everything can change in 12 months. We've seen it happen time and time again. Think about it. What if Kyler Murray, the Vikings' new starting quarterback, suffers an injury this season? What if McCarthy gets thrown into action and suddenly looks like a completely different player? What if this entire offseason serves as a wake-up call for him? A moment where he realizes he needs to grow up, put his head down, and actually develop his craft. It's entirely possible that JJ spends the entire 2025 season on the sideline, working with the coaching staff, refining his mechanics, studying film, and maturing both physically and mentally. Then, in 2027, he takes over the reins and looks fantastic. Stranger things have happened in this league. The problem is that Vikings fans have become prisoners of the moment, which is completely understandable given the circumstances. When you've got report after report about immaturity, when you see the team bring in Kyler Murray as a clear upgrade and long-term solution, when you hear whispers about potential trade demands, it's natural to assume the relationship between McCarthy and the Vikings is dead. But we need to remember that he was always viewed as a developmental prospect. Nobody expected him to come in and start immediately like a Caleb Williams or a Jaden Daniels. The plan was always for him to sit, learn, and develop. The injury derailed that timeline and created this messy situation, but it doesn't mean the story is over. That said, there's no sugarcoating the fact that the reporting around McCarthy has been consistently negative, and where there's smoke, there's usually fire. It seems pretty clear that head coach Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings coaching staff have some serious concerns about their young quarterback. The decision to aggressively pursue and ultimately sign Kyler Murray speaks volumes about their confidence level in McCarthy. If they truly believed JJ was the guy, would they have made such a significant investment in another quarterback? Probably not. So while it's wrong to declare McCarthy 100% done in Minnesota, it's also naive to ignore all the red flags that are currently flying. The most frustrating part about this entire situation is that it represents a potential massive miss on a first-round draft pick, which is absolutely devastating for any franchise, but particularly painful for a team like the Vikings that's trying to build a championship contender. First-round picks are supposed to be foundational pieces, especially at the quarterback position. When you invest that kind of capital in a player, you need them to work out. The fact that we're even having this conversation about whether McCarthy has a future with the team less than 2 years after drafting him is a troubling sign. Now let's shift gears and talk about the other major storyline that's got Vikings fans buzzing: Jonathan Greenard and his future with the team. Greenard had a $4 million roster bonus hit his contract this past Friday, and when the Vikings paid it, a lot of people assumed that meant a trade was off the table. But hold on just a minute, because $4 million, while not exactly pocket change, isn't necessarily enough to kill a trade if the right offer comes along. The real question is whether the Vikings should even be entertaining trade offers for Greenard in the first place. Here's where I'm going to plant my flag and probably upset some Vikings fans in the process. Trading Jonathan Greenard for anything less than a first-round pick would be absolute insanity. In fact, if I'm running the Vikings front office, I'm telling other teams that the asking price is a first-round pick, and if you can't meet that price, the conversation is over before it starts. Hang up the phone. Don't call back. Greenard stays in Minnesota. Why am I so adamant about this? Because Jonathan Greenard is an absolute stud. This isn't some mediocre player who had one good season and is now being overvalued. Greenard is a legitimate, bona fide, three-down edge rusher in the absolute prime of his career. When healthy, this guy basically walks out of bed every season and racks up 12.5 to 13 sacks. He's dominant against the run. He's a complete player who can do everything you ask of an edge rusher. If you put me on First Take or any other national sports show and told me that the Kansas City Chiefs or some other contender was sending just a second-round pick for Jonathan Greenard, I'd immediately say the Vikings got absolutely fleeced. The Vikings should not be in the business of getting fleeced on trades right now. This is a franchise that's trying to compete for championships, not rebuild. They went 9-8 last season with genuinely terrible quarterback play. With Kyler Murray now under center, this team has legitimate aspirations of making a deep playoff run, possibly even reaching the Super Bowl. And if that's your goal, if you're actually serious about competing for a championship, you need elite edge rushers. You need guys who can put their hand in the dirt and beat tackles one-on-one at a high level. The Vikings have two of those guys in Greenard and Dallas Turner. Why on earth would you voluntarily give one of them away for anything less than premium compensation? Some Vikings fans have convinced themselves that getting a second-round pick for Greenard would be great value, and I'm here to tell you that those fans are completely wrong. You sound ridiculous if you think a second-round pick is adequate return for a player of Greenard's caliber. This is a guy who would immediately make any contender significantly better on defense. The value he provides, both on the field and in the locker room, is enormous. He's also been instrumental in helping Dallas Turner develop as a young player. Having a veteran presence like Greenard, who's been around the league, who knows what it takes to succeed at the highest level, that's invaluable for a young edge rusher trying to find his way. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. What about Andrew Van Ginkel? Doesn't he factor into this equation? Yes, Van Ginkel is a fantastic player, but his superpower is his versatility and ability to disguise coverages and blitzes. He's not the prototypical edge rusher who's going to consistently win one-on-one matchups with his hand in the dirt. Greenard and Turner are those guys, and having both of them on the roster gives defensive coordinator Brian Flores incredible flexibility. In fact, I'd challenge Flores to find creative ways to get all three of these guys on the field at the same time, maybe by using Van Ginkel in more of a traditional linebacker role at times. If the Vikings trade Greenard, edge rusher immediately becomes a pressing need, and that's a problem. Van Ginkel is getting older and has his own injury history. Can Dallas Turner handle being the true number one edge rusher right now? Maybe eventually, but why rush it? Why not run it back for one more year with Greenard? Let Turner continue to develop and maximize your chances of actually competing for a Super Bowl. The logic of trading a proven commodity in his prime for a draft pick that might turn into a good player someday doesn't make sense for a team that's trying to win now. The reality is that Greenard is a hell of a football player and a hell of a locker room guy. His impact extends beyond just his on-field production. He sets a tone, he leads by example, and he's the kind of veteran presence that championship teams have on their roster. Unless someone comes along with a Godfather offer, a first-round pick that the Vikings absolutely cannot refuse, there's no reason to move on from him right now. So where does all of this leave the Vikings as they head deeper into the offseason? On one hand, you've got a quarterback situation that's somehow become more complicated and messier than anyone could have imagined. The JJ McCarthy experiment has been an unmitigated disaster so far, and whether he can recover and become the player the Vikings hoped they were getting remains one of the biggest question marks hovering over this franchise. The reported possibility that he might have requested a trade over competition, if true, is damning and suggests a level of immaturity that's simply unacceptable for a franchise quarterback. On the other hand, you've got the Jonathan Greenard situation, where the Vikings need to resist the temptation to trade away a premium player for less than premium value just because some fans and media members think getting younger at every position is always the right move. Sometimes, keeping your best players and actually trying to win a championship is the smarter play, and I'd argue this is one of those times. The common thread running through both of these situations is that the Vikings are at a crossroads. They've got a new quarterback in Kyler Murray who gives them a legitimate chance to compete right now. They've got a talented roster that's capable of making noise in the playoffs. But they've also got some serious question marks, particularly at the most important position in sports if McCarthy doesn't pan out and Murray doesn't deliver as expected. The next few months are going to be absolutely crucial for this franchise. How McCarthy responds to this adversity, whether he uses it as motivation to prove everyone wrong or whether he crumbles under the pressure, will tell us everything we need to know about his future. How the Vikings handle the Greenard situation. Whether they stand firm on their asking price or cave to pressure to make a move, will signal to the rest of the league whether they're serious about competing or just treading water. One thing is certain, Vikings fans are in for one hell of a ride. The drama isn't going away anytime soon, and that's what makes being a fan of this team so exhilarating and so frustrating at the same time. You never quite know what's coming next, whether it's going to be a brilliant move that pushes the franchise toward a championship or a head-scratching decision that sets them back years. But that's why we love this game. That's why we obsess over every report, every rumor, every behind-the-scenes whisper that comes out of Vikings headquarters. We're invested, emotionally and otherwise, in the success of this franchise, and we're going to ride this roller coaster wherever it takes us. So here's my challenge to all of you Vikings fans out there. Don't jump off the JJ McCarthy bandwagon completely just yet, but keep your expectations in check and your eyes wide open. Don't let the team trade Jonathan Greenard for anything less than top-tier value. And most importantly, buckle up, because this offseason is far from over. And if the first few months are any indication, we've got plenty more drama, excitement, and controversy coming our way. Make sure you smash that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Vikings chaos. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the JJ McCarthy situation and whether you think the Vikings should trade Greenard. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another update on your Minnesota Vikings. Trust me, with the way things are going, you're not going to want to miss a single development. The offseason is heating up, the questions are piling up, and the answers are going to determine whether the Vikings are legitimate Super Bowl contenders or just another team with unfulfilled potential. Stay tuned, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay passionate about your Vikings, because that's what being a fan is all about.
Skol, hey everyone, Vikings. I'm working to hit 2,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.